Welcome to the deep dive today. We're diving straight into the heart of a political crisis in South Korea,
Yeah.
where a controversial attempt to impose martial law has left the nation teetering on the brink.
It's a truly unprecedented situation.
Okay.
President Yoon's sudden decree sent shockwaves throughout the country.
Hmm.
And although Parliament swiftly overturned it, the aftershocks are still being felt.
So let's unpack this. What exactly happened and why is everyone talking about impeachment?
Well, President Yoon issued this martial law decree, a move that many saw as an attempt to consolidate power. However, Parliament, acting as a crucial check and balance, immediately stepped in and revoked the decree.
So the system worked, at least on that front.
Yes, it did. But this display of executive overreach has seriously damaged public trust, leading to widespread calls for President Yoon's removal from office, hence the upcoming impeachment vote.
Right. We have audio from a news segment that captures the raw emotion on the streets of Seoul as the situation unfolds.
It really helps us understand the gravity of what's happening. For instance, in the audio, you can hear the ongoing protest even as we speak. It's evening in Seoul, the workday is over, but people are still gathering, making their voices heard.
And there's something particularly striking about the type of protests, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The audio mentions candlelight vigils taking place. These aren't just your average protests. They hold deep symbolic meaning in South Korea, harking back to historical moments of peaceful resistance and democratic upheaval. Think back to the protests that led to the resignation of President Park Geun-hye in 2017. They were characterized by these very same candlelight vigils, showcasing the collective will of the people.
So these vigils are almost a visual shorthand for "we demand change."
Precisely. And they carry a lot of weight in the South Korean political landscape. It's a powerful way for citizens to show their solidarity and their commitment to democratic principles.
And this brings us to the big event looming over everything. The impeachment vote scheduled for Saturday at 7 p.m.
Yeah,
It sounds like a nail-biter.
it certainly is. The opposition needs 200 out of 300 parliamentary votes to impeach President Yoon. Securing a two-thirds majority is a tall order. It's a political tightrope walk.
So walk us through what that process even looks like. How does impeachment actually work in South Korea?
Sure, it's a two-step process. First, the National Assembly, which is their parliament, votes on the impeachment motion. If it passes with the required two-thirds majority, the case moves to the Constitutional Court.
So even if they get those 200 votes on Saturday, it's not over.
Not at all. The Constitutional Court will then review the case and ultimately decide whether to uphold or overturn the impeachment. This process can take months, adding another layer of uncertainty to the already volatile situation.
And what are the chances they actually reach that two-thirds majority?
It's difficult to say for certain. The ruling party initially vowed to block the impeachment, but cracks are starting to show. 5 of their MPs are now undecided, and there's a lot of behind-the-scenes maneuvering happening. It all comes down to whether the opposition can sway enough votes their way.
So there's a very real possibility that President Yoon could be forced out of office.
Yes. But we have to remember that the Prime Minister would step in as acting president if that happens. However, even his role is shrouded in controversy.
You mentioned that earlier. What are the whispers about the Prime Minister's involvement?
There are concerns about his potential connection to the martial law decree itself. Some speculate that he might have played a role in its drafting or at least had knowledge of it beforehand. These suspicions are fueled by his close relationship with President Yoon and his silence on the matter.
So even if President Yoon is removed, his successor might not inspire much confidence.
Exactly. It creates a deeply unsettling situation. The country could be left with a leader facing allegations of complicity in the very act that led to the crisis in the first place. It's a political powder keg.
Wow, it sounds like this is just the tip of the iceberg.
It really does.
Yeah.
This impeachment vote is just one chapter in a much larger story. The real question is, what will this crisis mean for the future of South Korea's democracy?
And how are the South Korean people themselves reacting to all of this turmoil?
We're hearing reports of widespread anxiety and a sense of betrayal. The news audio captures people expressing their disappointment and concern for the future. It's clear that this crisis has deeply shaken their faith in the political system.
So even if the system worked in overturning the martial law decree, the damage is already done.
Absolutely. This situation has exposed a vulnerability in the system, a potential for abuse of power that has left many South Koreans questioning the very foundations of their democracy. It's a stark reminder that democratic institutions, no matter how robust they appear, are always susceptible to erosion.
It's a sobering thought. And with so much uncertainty hanging in the balance, the question remains, what comes next for South Korea? We'll dive deeper into the potential outcomes and long-term consequences of this crisis when we return. We're back, and the situation in South Korea continues to unfold with each passing hour. It's almost like a political thriller playing out in real time, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But amidst all this talk of impeachment and potential power vacuums, what about President Yoon himself?
That's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
It's almost deafening his silence in the wake of all this. No public statements, no explanations for the martial law decree. It's like he's vanished into thin air, and that only adds to the public's unease.
You'd think he'd be front and center trying to defend his actions or offer some sort of explanation.
You'd expect so. This absence of communication is incredibly intriguing. Is it a strategic move to avoid further scrutiny, or is it indicative of something deeper? Perhaps a sign that he's lost control of the situation.
It's difficult to say for certain, but it's certainly fueling speculation and raising even more questions. While President Yoon remains silent, the news audio we has paints a fascinating picture of a deeply divided society. It seems there are protests in support of him as well, not just against him.
That's a vital observation.
Yeah.
It underscores the polarization that exists within South Korean society right now. On one hand, you have those vehemently opposed to President Yoon's actions, seeing them as a blatant attack on democratic norms. On the other hand, you have those who stand by him, perhaps viewing the impeachment attempt as an overreaction or a politically motivated maneuver.
So it's not a simple black and white situation.
Not at all. This internal division adds yet another layer of complexity to this already intricate political landscape. It makes predicting the outcome of the impeachment vote even more challenging.
And speaking of complexity, the news segment mentions another twist in the story, the resignation of the defense minister. He's taken responsibility for the martial law decree and is now facing a travel ban as prosecutors investigate.
That's a significant development. It raises questions about who was ultimately behind the decree and what their motivations were. Was this a rogue action by the defense minister, or was he acting on orders from higher-ups? Was there an attempt to shield the president from direct blame? It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, with each new revelation adding another dimension to the story.
So even if President Yoon is impeached, this investigation into the defense minister could continue to cast a long shadow over the whole affair.
Precisely. It highlights the potential for a long and messy legal battle that could further divide the country.
And amidst all this uncertainty, there's the prime minister waiting in the wings, potentially poised to step into the top job. But as we discussed earlier, there are concerns about his potential involvement in the martial law decree as well.
Yes, and that raises serious questions about his legitimacy and his ability to unite the country if he does become acting president. Would he be seen as a continuation of President Yoon's policies, or would he chart a different course? It's a precarious situation, and his actions in the coming days will be closely scrutinized.
It sounds like whoever ends up leading South Korea post-impeachment vote will have a Herculean task ahead of them.
Absolutely. Rebuilding trust, addressing the underlying issues that led to this crisis, and navigating the complex geopolitical landscape will require exceptional leadership and a commitment to dialogue and reconciliation.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and consider the broader implications of all this. What does this crisis say about South Korea's democracy?
It certainly reveals a fragility within the system, a vulnerability to the abuse of executive power that many might not have anticipated.
So even a country with a seemingly strong democratic foundation can experience these kinds of shocks.
Yes, and I think it underscores the importance of vigilance, of safeguarding democratic norms and institutions, even when things seem stable. It's a reminder that democracy is not a static endpoint, but an ongoing process that requires constant nurturing and protection.
It sounds like a wake-up call, not just for South Korea, but for democracies around the world. It's easy to take democratic principles for granted until they're threatened.
Precisely. This situation should make us all reflect on the health of our own democratic institutions and the role we play as citizens in upholding them.
So back to South Korea. The news audio continues to highlight these candlelight vigils, and I'm struck by the resilience of the people. Even in the face of this crisis, they're engaging in peaceful protest, making their voices heard.
Yes, and that's a testament to the enduring power of democratic ideals. These vigils, as we discussed earlier, carry profound historical significance in South Korea. They evoke memories of past struggles for democracy, of citizens uniting to demand change. It's a powerful symbol of hope and a reminder that the people themselves can be a force for accountability and progress.
It's almost inspiring, isn't it, to see people taking ownership of their democracy even in such a turbulent time.
It is. It shows that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit, the desire for a just and equitable society can prevail. And it highlights the critical role that public engagement plays in shaping the future of a nation.
So what are we to make of all this? As we head into the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore the potential outcomes of the impeachment vote and what they might mean for the future of South Korea. We'll also delve into the broader implications of this crisis for the region and for democracies around the world. We're back, and as we inch closer to that critical impeachment vote, all eyes are on South Korea. It's decision time, and the nation stands at a crossroads with each potential outcome carrying its own set of complexities and challenges.
It's a moment fraught with uncertainty. The ripple effects of this decision will extend far beyond the immediate political landscape, impacting everything from South Korea's economy to its international relations.
So let's break down those potential outcomes, shall we? First up, what if the impeachment vote succeeds? What happens then?
Well, as we discussed, the prime minister would assume the role of acting president.
Hmm.
However, those lingering questions about his potential connection to the martial law decree cast a long shadow over his potential leadership.
So even if President Yoon is removed, the controversy doesn't just disappear.
Not at all. In fact, it could even intensify. The opposition might see the prime minister as simply a continuation of the same administration, potentially leading to further protests and political instability.
And what about the investigation into the defense minister? Would that continue under a new acting president?
Most likely. This investigation has taken on a life of its own, and it's unlikely to be swept under the rug, especially with the public demanding answers. It could even implicate others within the government, further destabilizing the situation.
So even in this successful impeachment scenario, South Korea faces a very rocky road ahead.
It does. It's a scenario filled with potential pitfalls and unforeseen consequences.
Okay, so let's flip the script. What if the impeachment vote fails? What happens then?
President Yoon would remain in office, but his authority and legitimacy would be severely damaged. He'd be leading a deeply divided nation with a significant portion of the population having lost faith in his leadership.
It's hard to imagine him governing effectively under those circumstances.
It is. His every move would be met with skepticism and resistance. The opposition would likely double down on their efforts to challenge his policies, and even members of his own party might start to distance themselves.
It almost sounds like a recipe for political paralysis.
It could very well lead to that. Key legislation could stall, essential reforms could be delayed, and the government could find itself bogged down in endless political battles.
And how do you think the South Korean people would react if President Yoon survives the impeachment?
Well, there's a high probability of widespread disappointment and anger, particularly among those who viewed the impeachment as a chance for accountability and change. We could see a resurgence of protests, perhaps even larger and more intense than those we're witnessing now.
So whether he stays or goes, President Yoon's actions have ignited a fire that's going to be incredibly difficult to extinguish.
That's a powerful analogy, and I think it's accurate. This crisis has exposed deep fissures within South Korean society, and those fissures aren't going to simply disappear overnight.
So it sounds like South Korea is in for a turbulent period regardless of the impeachment outcome. But amidst all this turmoil, is there any hope for a more positive future?
I believe there is. This crisis, as painful as it is, could serve as a catalyst for much-needed political reforms. The weaknesses in the system have been laid bare, and there's an opportunity to address them head-on.
What kind of reforms are we talking about?
Well, there could be calls for greater checks on executive power, more transparency in government decision-making, and stronger mechanisms for public participation and accountability.
So a strengthening of democratic institutions, essentially.
Precisely. This crisis could be a wake-up call, prompting a reassessment of how power is wielded and how citizens can have a more meaningful voice in shaping their nation's future.
It's a glimmer of hope in what otherwise feels like a very dark time for South Korea.
It is. And it's important to remember that the South Korean people have a long history of resilience and a deep commitment to democratic values. They've overcome challenges in the past, and they have the capacity to do so again.
Well, one thing's for sure, we'll be watching closely as this story continues to unfold. And for our listeners, as we wrap up this deep dive into the South Korean political crisis, I want to leave you with a final thought. Could a crisis like this happen in your own country? What safeguards are in place to protect your democracy, and what role can you play in ensuring those safeguards remain strong? It's a question worth pondering as we witness the fragility of democratic institutions, not just in South Korea, but around the world. Thanks for joining us.